All right, welcome everybody to Hendersonville, North Carolina, in the palatial BGW offices. Hopefully, everybody can hear me okay. I can see Jack on a nice big screen TV, and he can see me in this, what looks like I'm in a massive room if my camera is to be believed, and yet at the same time, it's a pretty small conference room. Anyway, Gary is out on vacation with his family right now, enjoying himself, trying to have some balance in his life. So he is not joining us, which means that I don't know which webinar number that this is. So I apologize. It's a bajillion and five. And then also it means that, hey, Jack and I are going to wrap this baby and land the plane at about 11:45 today and give you guys about 15 minutes back. So I think, kind of the only thing that I had to start off with, we're going to be going over today, hey, what are the tea leaves? And also, I'll apologize in advance. I think I got everything started correctly here, but if I didn't, and you're chatting away or trying to blow us up with Q&A, we apologize if I don't see it. Jack, keep us honest. The thing that I was going to start off with, since we're going into, hey, what's really going to happen with the economy, and what should I be prepared for as a business owner? I think Jack's going to give us a good education on what the tea leaves are saying and what are the components of the tea leaves. I just think from my own perspective, um, I'm feeling somewhat torn because on the one hand, the tariff policy appears to be working in terms of at least driving conversations with people that seem to be having some resolutions that result in opening up markets. That's a general, that seems like, assuming all that holds true, that's generally positive. And at some point, you just think, well, hey, if I'm selling more goods to India and China and Europe, that probably is good, for people back here in the US. At the same time, the way that everything's been structured, we don't feel really that much pain yet. We've had a couple clients that have had to pay tariffs on things so far. They just made the announcement that, hey, even though at the stroke of midnight, some tariffs are in effect. At the same time, only, but if stuff's already in the ocean, no. So I think what a lot of, what has proven true in the fact that, imports are down, but so are exports right now. But at the same time, we haven't had massive levels of inflation yet. That seems to be just a function of, we continue to just burn off the stuff that people bought as an anticipatory plan to otherwise blunt the effect of having to pay more for stuff later on. But at the end of the day, it seems like the tea leaves, Jack, would seem to show that 10 to 15% tariffs across the board in every country seems to be sort of the target landing spot. In some of those places we didn't have any before. So, either I'm going to have to be a savvy negotiator as a customer, or I'm going to have to pass a price increase on, somewhere in there. So I think that, with everything, and it same kind of applies to the tax policy changes, like we're all like, woohoo, tax extensions, that's awesome. That's really great. And at the same time, if we take one that's been near and dear to Jack and I's heart, the estate tax, they didn't solve that. They just kicked the can to 2028, So, all the pain is, somewhat delayed. And that to me feels like, hey, I'd love to be able to eat the plate of nachos today and not have to show up on the scale for a year because I got a beach trip coming up. It's like, that's just not the way that it works. So I think that I don't know. I mean, at the same time, I thought the stock market's been overvalued for about 20 years now. So, like who am I to talk to? Don't listen to me. I have cash underneath the mattress right now. So, um, anyway, Jack, off to you.
Yeah, so yeah, it's an interesting um view of people's behavior from a business perspective. And we have clients that are okay, we have relationships with various people, various suppliers in various countries, and that some have higher tariffs than others. So they're asking, okay, is this an event that would be force majeure in the contract so that we can switch suppliers and those kind of things. And so it really has some very significant implications. I'm seeing more of the impact of these tariffs on consumer purchases, meaning pricing of clients with respect to consumer products, and them having to adjust their price lists. Not in all cases, and I think that the ones who have well, you can go two ways with this. If you have a lot of inventory, you can either go ahead and increase your prices now and just say, hey, sorry, not our fault. Or you can basically represent that, okay, we have this inventory that we're willing to sell at this price for this period of time, and create maybe I wouldn't say artificial demand, but I would say an increased level of awareness that prices are going to go up, which may cause people to behave differently, meaning rushing out and buying stuff at a lower price. So see all those things kind of happening. So before we kind of go into the core of things, I thought to myself, it's been a while since we've talked about just kind of random thoughts of the day. And I was like, okay, and it's been a while since I've thrown out some dad jokes. So I kind of found the best of both worlds. But the first one that I want to share with you is, and I saw this actually on either on the news or maybe on social media, but in the Brooklyn Cyclones, a minor league baseball team based in New York, held its annual Seinfeld Night promotion, where an Elaine dance contest stole the show. The team has had Seinfeld Night promotion since 2014, so for over 10 years. And this year's event featured a contest to emulate the dance performed by Elaine Bennis in the season 8 episode, The Little Kicks. They shared the video on social media, which is where I saw it, showing dancers of all ages, many in Elaine cosplay, attempting to dance to the dance described by George Costanza. And this just makes me laugh. And if you have seen this in its original when it first came out, you had George Costanza say that it is a full body dry heave set to music. And it just makes me laugh a lot. There was a New York actress that was named the winner of the contest, and everyone who participated received a limited edition The Kramer bobblehead depicting a painting of Kramer. So there is current event number one and current event number two. In Shrewsbury, Pennsylvania, a truckload of hot dogs spilled across a Pennsylvania interstate after a crash that briefly clogged the heavy traveled artery in both directions. Crews were stuck with a job they did not relish, rolling up the scattered tube steaks for disposal. It was perhaps their worst nightmare. Apparently, hot dogs are slippery when you try to handle them and try to put them away. And so they actually made some t-shirts after that. And they used some sort of scooper to pick it up. So anyway, there is your morning dad humor that some of you are laughing and some of you are saying, why did you waste my last 2 minutes? So that's okay. All right. So when Adam and I were talking about what we thought we might want to talk about, it's, a little past mid-year, obviously, and looking into 2026 as to what the experts are saying out there about what to expect. And then, kind of peeling that back to why are they saying those things? What causes them to have an opinion one way or another? And so I started looking into what we hear that the market is slowing. So what does that mean? And how could anybody know that other, with specificity? And so I looked into it, and there apparently are some things that are more universally or looked to more frequently, to regardless of whether you feel one way or another, that are looked at and then interpreted a certain way. So there are categories of what signals a slowing market. And within that, the first category is labor market weakness. And so what does that mean? And so to throw out some statistics, the labor market in July saw just 73,000 new jobs, well below forecasts. Revisions, so what they previously reported in prior months, were downgraded to only 33,000 jobs added, suggesting a significant slowdown. Unemployment rate increased slightly to 4.2%. And then you have Fed officials and others that are still talking about what might happen in the remainder of Q3 and into Q4 with respect to interest rates, and possibly are cutting them, keeping the same. So, and the current discussion, I believe, is that there would be some cuts into 2025.
If I could,
Have you heard that as well?
yeah, if I could also talk about the unemployment number,
Yep.
just because that got a lot of press about, hey, I don't, what was that a made up number? You the thing is, like, I didn't look it up prior to the webinar to fact check it. The thing is, like, ADP and Paychex also produce their own independent numbers of what actually happened on their systems. So if you ever just want to, fact check, what did the government give me versus what is ADP and Paychex seeing as payroll ads? They actually publish that information, and assuming that they're both obviously, ADP and Paychex isn't, the thing like the economy as a whole, but it's like they're going to have, at least relative to their own employee portfolio or company portfolio, what was added or not. So you kind of would wonder, okay, is everything moving directionally in the same direction? So just to the audience, I got it, hey, was that, is Jack citing real numbers or not citing real? Who knows? But at the same time, you can independently verify it through two other indices, through Paychex and ADP. And I will shut up with that, Jack. Thank you. You're on a roll.
No, perfect. No, all good. And then, I'd mentioned, and they talk about leading indicators. Okay, what does that mean? We hear that on the news all the time. And again, I'm not an economist. So, I'm like, okay, I kind of take a leap of faith when I hear these things. But so now let's talk about what that really means. So there is the US Leading Economic Index, the LEI, and it fell 0.3% in June. So it's declined 2.8% over the first half of 2025, faster drop than in late 2024. And there is the suggestion that the drop in 2024 was what was a lead indicator to trigger or show that a recession might be on the way. And then according to JP Morgan, the probability of a recession by year end stands at 40%, which is all interesting numbers and gobbledygook unless you really understand what is behind that. So I said, let me find out what the LEI really is. And so there are 10 key components that is put into the LEI. And the board that does the LEI is an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit research organization. And they are the ones, so when you hear these statistics being shouted out there on ABC News, CBS, whatever, CNN, in the newspaper, in your local news, this is usually what you're hearing when they talk about that. So 10 key components. Number one, average weekly hours, and it's focused on manufacturing, and it signals early changes in production activity. Number two, average weekly initial jobless claims. So it shows employment shifts within industries and across industries. Manufacturers' new orders, and focusing on consumer goods. So that is an indication of demand and therefore production being amped up or reduced. manufacturers' new orders on capital goods. So that's geared more towards business investment and dollars spent in that arena. ISM, new orders index, broader manufacturing demand, building permits for new housing. So, whether it is in residential or commercial, so construction and housing activity signaling. Are we needing building new facilities? Or and I would say that what I don't know is, it's building permits for new housing. Does that include maybe conversion of condos to apartments and things like that, where there's a lot of activity? The S&P 500 stock index, obviously, leading credit index, showing, okay, lending facilities, interest rate spread, 10-year treasury versus Fed funds rate, and then consumer expectations for business conditions. And that is more subjective. And why is it not? I believe it's number 10. It's described as sentiment about the economy's future. So, and then they talk about, okay, what if it falls several months in a row? What does it mean? Current status, that according to this conference board, the pattern now meets their rescission signal criteria. Doesn't mean that a rescission is coming, but it increases their thoughts on the likelihood that it might occur during this year. So I will stop there and see, Adam, if you would like to add any comments to any of those 10 key components.
It's more of just as you're reading them out loud, I've heard a lot of them before too, and it makes me wonder, like, where would I even understand how to get manufacturers' orders for capital goods? As far as we have clients, as far as I know, like, they're not, it's not a legal requirement to report that I just bought a dozer, so like I have always kind of wondered, like, well, how do you even know what that number is? Like, I don't think it's made up, but at the same time, it does make you wonder, like, how do you know that? Like, what's the authoritative source that tells you what was ordered? So it was just more just a question about, I wonder how they actually get that data. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and that's why I'm just like, okay, there are people that are smarter than me putting these numbers together, and I think many of us, maybe I should speak for myself, take a leap of faith that, okay, it's people are generating these numbers and this information and it being interpreting them correctly, which is also why, as I've said many times in the past 5 years on this program, that switch between radio stations or on your XM dial between two different channels that lean in different directions, including the ones that are financially oriented that lean in different directions. And then you may figure out what is actually happening if you kind of take the average of what they're both saying to each other. So, all right. So the next thing that is on this list with respect to what to expect in 2026, or indicators of what to expect going into the end of the year, are the use of smart cost controls, which is, and we've talked about that. Okay, do you increase prices? And we've had people on this program that say, okay, well, if slashing prices for your goods sends a message and it becomes more commoditized, and maybe you should increase prices and people will pay them, to your surprise. So there's varying, I think, positions on that. And the advice in this article is to don't knee jerk, do not have a very kind of follow your gut, but do it in an informed way. And so that, is it appropriate to increase the prices? Well, that would be factoring into things like your costs, your competition, and all those things that you would normally do. I think that we, as business owners in this day and age, with all the technology that we have, to be able to find out what's really going on around us, rather than just being focused what's literally around us, but more figuratively in a greater geography, a greater scope. gives us a competitive advantage, but also can create additional stress as to, oh my gosh, there's more data points, and is it relevant to my business and what I'm doing versus, okay, how they conduct business in Europe. And so know your data points. We've talked about this before in the talent pipeline, and making sure that, there's all kinds of cute phrases that we've heard before. We have the right people on your bus. Make sure you know your troops, make sure you know what your troops think about you and your leadership, and give them the permission to be very candid with you in a respectful way, so that they don't always tell you what you want to hear. And so thinking about those things. Also on this list is supply chain and operations. And so the expectation is that supply chain is going to become tighter. It's going to you cannot access the things that you want as easily, because people in other countries are going to be reducing and ratcheting down their production, because they don't want to be stuck with all this inventory that no one wants to purchase, because they're going to get hammered with these tariffs. And so, as we've discussed, it's okay, this roller coaster ride that everybody's going on. And, as Adam said at the beginning of the hour, maybe some normalization where it is, pick a number like he did, 10, 12%, whatever it may be, so that we have some normalization and that becomes the new norm. It's kind of like, the sticker price that we sometimes get when gas prices increase and they spike up. And if you go through the history of, and this is a Jack theory, but I've seen it, that if you go through the history of price increases for a lot of things, but gas in particular, that, there is an increase in prices, and we all complain about it and we suffer through the pain, but very rarely does the price come back down to very near where it was before. And if you look at the data, it will, and if it does come down, it will, the cycle, the bottom number will ratchet up slowly, slowly, slowly. And then we just become accustomed to paying $3 a gallon for gas, kind of thing. And then we rejoice when it's lower than $3 a gallon. And then you go back 2 days later and it's above $3 a gallon again. So supply chain is going to be an issue, and we're just all going to have to get used to paying the price for these things moving forward. So I know that you have your perspective on pricing as well, so I will stop here so Adam can share his perspective on that.
Yeah, no, I think the way that I would be viewing things right now, when faced with this, is that until there's probably until the dust is settled, there's just still a lot of fear, out there. So that fear usually translates into, I'm going to put my head down and not buy stuff. So I just think accepting the reality of, I'm probably going to have some customer orders that are delayed potentially, is just reality. But related to that, what I'd also look at is that, there's some clients that are on here that we have that are counter-cyclical, meaning like they're not, there could be a slowdown, but they actually increase, for whatever reason that they increase. So sort of knowing where you fit in terms of the broader economic pattern is pretty important. And, the way that you would do that is you just would go back and look at, like, if you wanted to geek out on the data, you would go back and look at, well, what did the graph line of the US economy look like in terms of growth, and how does that compare to my growth? And just look at, well, where did the pattern overlay itself, or where was it counter-cyclical, just so that I can kind of know what to bank on. It also doesn't excuse, hey, just keep on grinding, keep on getting out there, and don't give up hope, and keep on selling. It's a good opportunity to get super close to your customers. It's a great opportunity to engage in conversations. Jack brought up about pricing. You know, what a great conversation to be able to have to say, you know, hey, customer, I don't really know what's going to happen yet. You know, I'm trying to get out ahead of it. What do you think is fair? You know, what are you seeing and what do you think is going to happen? Like, it's a good opportunity to say, hey, we're in this together. What do you think we ought to do, you know, about this? Then lastly, you know, Jack hit on the supply chain. You know, there's, on the one hand, you could say, hey, I know the answer. Let's just, you know, I use an example. You know, we just bought a whole bunch of office furniture for our move to Savona Mills that's coming up. But the problem, so like the, you know, we the manufacturer is a good friend of mine, so he cut us a great deal. But as he's talking about, like, oh my God, you know, tariffs, China had inventory in Canada. I'm having to buy stuff in Canada, figure out how do we stage in the US, da da da. The knee-jerk reaction would be, well, hey, let's just start sourcing some of this. I mean, you're producing a stand-up desk. You know, surely there are alternative suppliers of the widgets for the components that go into the stand-up desk in the US. It's like, that may be true for like the first level, but that person's going to have the same problem downstream. And it sort of gets down to like, well, until like every nut and bolt and screw is manufactured in the US, then I don't have um, I don't have total control over my supply chain. Like, at some point, something's going to break down. So when I think about the problem from that perspective, I kind of quickly regroup and say, you know, I probably ought to focus on like supplier diversity as a good plan. Like, where would I go if I had to source something new? And having, you know, sort of out clauses in some of my contracts. But to the top of the webinar, I think it's, I don't know. I mean, call me a pessimist, Jack. I think the reality that we're going to produce every nut, bolt, and screw in the U.S. is probably foolish. You know, like, it's hard to roll back the clock on globalization, because that would imply that every country in the world has a measure of self-sufficiency, and just accept this for what it is. You know, people are going to tariff our stuff on the way in, and we're going to tariff their stuff on the way in. And now there's just like the new normal is there's a new baseline tax, and we just don't know what the frick it is yet. You know, but
Yeah.
it seems like everything's leading towards 10 to 15%. So let's just plan on that, you know, and then kind of move on, because that's the best you can do at this point.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, there's no feasible way to create a bubble above the United States and say, all right, we're self-sufficient, and that we're going to do everything. I mean, there's always, I mean, it's a global economy, and we've become reliant upon that. And, you know, the understanding that this is an adjustment to the global economy, not a shift in becoming totally self-reliant upon ourselves, because it's just impossible to do. You also mentioned, and the diversity of your suppliers, and that's one of the things that's on this list. And I've experienced that with clients who are asking about, okay, well, or having me negotiate into the, you know, when you look at a force majeure clause, you typically, so, you know, impossibility or temporary impossibility of performing under the contract, force majeure. So it basically will say things like, okay, acts of God, acts of war, acts of government, those kind of things. If one party can't perform, then their performance is excused for a period of time. And so we are more so negotiating those force majeure clauses so that they have provisions that are very clear as to, you know, only a force majeure event. Well, there has to be an endpoint in the inability for them to be able to supply the stuff, which would then allow the customer contracting party to go elsewhere. So now you have those exit cards in these agreements that allow a shift in supply chain if the party can't perform. And so then you get very specific as to what are those things. And so it's not just an act of God, it is essentially one that is impacting the business specifically, that has has a material adverse effect. So you put in all of these concepts in contract law into this one little paragraph to ensure that you have the ability to go and get stuff elsewhere. Now, of course, if you're the supplier, you want to hold on to them and hold handcuffs to them as long as possible. But in this, and so then import the concept of tariffs and what happens if it becomes too expensive. And so now we are negotiating price differentials. If the price goes above a certain amount, percentage wise, then, is there a kick out for that? And it would be, okay, well, who should bear the risk of that? Is it the supplier or is it the customer? So you get into all those kind of conceptual issues that are negotiated more so these days than they ever were in the past. I want to go back to talking about cost controls because I kind of glossed over that. But a quote here is that not all costs are created equal. Some fuel growth and others just burn cash. So when we talk about kind of being taken a perspective, introspective view of your business and see where you're spending money, that just because that worked previously doesn't mean it's going to work moving forward into 2026. So rather than waiting until the end of the year or beginning of next year to decide to make changes, there should be, and I'm seeing clients do this, which is, okay, we're looking at this contract and these contract terms. We have until 2 months prior to the end of the year. So we have to let them know by the end of October whether or not we're going to renew. And that also gives us negotiating power because of the things that are going on. They're in a higher tariffed country. So it gives us some wiggle room. So looking into all those things, looking at the ROI on what you're spending on, I will tell you here internally, and I've said this before, that it's more difficult to get marketing dollars to spend. The process is just more intentional and guarded. It's not that, for a legit purpose, and none of us here at the firm are not going to get the money that we've requested to do things. It's just that we are held more accountable to what is the purpose, who are we meeting with, who is in our pack, that we're, basically our business development wolf pack that is coming with me or participating in this. And then what are we doing to follow up, and what is the expected return on investment? So I will tell you, our forums have changed this year to be more intentional because of things like this that we need to think of money that we're spending. And then we talked about generally in the past, just looking at your contracts as an opportunity to renegotiate terms and conditions, where you have more leverage now created by tariffs, that you may be able to go and say, okay, we appreciate and understand the circumstances are out of your control, but it is inequitable for us as the customer consumer to bear the 100% increase of that. And so, and obviously you're not going to negotiate that with Best Buy. Your consumer goods, you got to pay for whatever you're going to pay. So we're talking about really B2B, business to business transactions where you might be able to negotiate on various levels and sharing the risk, including the risk that those tariffs may not come down to 10, 15%. They may stay up where they're going to stay for a short period of time. And you run out of that inventory that you paid for less for, and now you're going to have to pass along the cost. So, it's really a lot of competing interests between the contracting parties in a contract, supplier versus user. I'll stop there and see, Adam, if you want to have any comments on costs, cutting or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's always obviously prudent, but I think from your perspective, what you just described, is the not shoemaker example, but maybe a law firm that starts with an S, example of cost justification. I think the way that I tend to think about that is that going back to, unless I can prove that my growth is not tied to the economy in any way, shape, or form, I just, it's not that I would, it's not that I wouldn't still continue to invest. It's just more like, now's the time to be projected. Like if you're following a good plan, like, and if you've never read The Great Game of Business, it's a great book, Great Game of Business. But they advocate revenue planning for the next calendar year, really starting now. And that really is going to drive what's your overall expense budget for 2026, because obviously you can't spend money that you're not going to sell and collect. So I think if you're following that as a good plan and starting to come up with your top line, now, and applying some intelligence to it, if the team's producing a revenue forecast that has better growth than you've ever had, ever by percentage, like unless you're a startup, it might be the time to poke a few holes in that and say, well, hey, before we go spending the money, because what always happens is, hey, we're going to grow by 25%, Jack. We need to hire, 8 more people to ramp up for that growth that we're projecting. It's like, I got it. Easy, Tiger. Maybe we plan for half of that until we see better clarity in terms of what's going to happen. So I think, I wouldn't get all pessimistic, but I would say, hey, now may not be the time to bet the farm on outsized growth relative to what I've ever had in the past.
Yeah, and it's an interesting phenomenon because then it's, fear of missing out, meaning that you end up hitting a home run and then you don't have the appropriate staffing. So you kind of have to limp your way into creating capacity. So also understand that. So, it's not, there's no perfect solution, but taking it slowly. If you're on the side of really fearful that you're not going to be ready, then yeah, absolutely taking a slower approach to expansion and growth. One other thing I also want to bring up is on this list is talking about communications, internal and external. And we've talked about that many times before in many different ways. And so, for example, internal, what culture do you have and how do you address that? So if you have a culture of not necessarily being, I don't want to say warm and fuzzy as a group, but it's more of, okay, you send out an email on Fridays and give a report and it's via email, you're not getting people together, then, if you don't continue to do that, then there's going to be maybe fear of the unknown. So, the suggestion here is to make sure that, you are communicating and communicating properly, not in a fearful way. So it also says, keep a calm, consistent voice in all channels. And they don't mean literally voice in your tone that you're verbally expressing. They mean voice in, as they say, in all channels. So do not create a panic, but be informative and tell your crew what's going on. Keep your customers informed. And that's again a suggestion on how you get through this period of time into 2026, which is to make sure that you're not retracting, either purposefully because you just don't want to share bad news. But if you only share the good news, then that breeds suspicion as well. But also that you're not retracting unintentionally because you're so busy doing other stuff and you're basically leaving those types of communications on the back burner on your to-do list, and you never get to the second page on your to-do list because you're so busy doing other stuff, and other stuff takes precedent beyond that. So there's a strong suggestion that and there's an expectation, I think, that is growing amongst the recipients of services and goods, so customers as well as employers, that there be this open communication, because they are just like all of us. All of us are hearing it, and hearing it more often, and hearing it from more places. It's kind of like next door, which its original purpose was to bring neighborhoods together and give them a forum to communicate and have a lost and found, and have, security issues and a discussion, and buying and selling stuff has now been politicized. And I see, I turned it off. In fact, I had it only set to show me like the security things. And now even that has become politicized. So again, nothing against next door. It's just kind of the way things have developed. So we hear it all the time. Your customers are hearing it all the time. Your employees, customers are hearing it. So anyway, that's more commentary than maybe you wanted.
Go get him, Jack. I think probably the last thing that I would hit on before we close here at 11:45, and shut it off before anybody flames us or asks any questions. That Joe hit a point in the chat about the labor statistics being revised downward, which does happen, and at the same time, downward revisions have happened more frequently than upward revisions. So what it made me think about, again, if I'm a business owner really thinking about, well, what's the truth, what should I count on? You got Biden who's saying the economy is great, trust me, and people are like, no, I don't trust you, and it doesn't feel great. And now the Trump administration is kind of saying the same thing. Hey, the economy is great, trust me, but yet it doesn't feel great. So if you go back to, well, what's the source of truth? It really is, how easy is it for me to get a lot of money from a bank? And right now, I don't know about you, Jack, but that is still tough. So I remember a long time ago hearing a very high level Bank of America executive say at a luncheon, we know the economy before anybody knows the economy. So that always sat with me. And, I can kind of use access to credit as a proxy for truth. And if it's easy for our clients to get credit, then it's like, hey, the smarter folk feel, well, the people with better access to the real-time data are feeling pretty good right now. But if people are getting run through the ringer, and it's hard to get credit, and it feels like, geez, I didn't know that I had leper on my forehead, which is what it feels like today. No offense if we have any bankers on the call. I don't think we do, just from scanning the list. But then it just means that, hey, they're not feeling great either. So it's just another indicator to me to be a little bit more conservative. Well, to be prudently aggressive, or conservative. In other words, like, I love the whole Warren Buffett, when other people are fearful, I'm aggressive, or like whatever the quote is, paraphrased. I totally believe that, and at the same time, he makes some very well-placed, educated bets, So I just think the lending environment is just, to me, kind of the ultimate indicator of, hey, how's it? What can I really plan on? When that starts feeling real easy, and we're hearing more yeses than nos, which is not the case right now. And when we're hearing more on renewals that are like smooth sailing, no problems, blah, 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 I got my covenant waiver, versus like, Jack, I'm going to need you to bend over. I'm going to do the proctology exam. I will need DNA, and I'm taking possession of your firstborn, which is what it's like right now. It's just tough.
Okay, so that we don't end on that visual, I totally agree with you that, and it's also, again, hopefully we don't have any bankers on the line, but you know, bankers are going to say yes, or they're going to say probably yes, or they're going to say maybe. And so it's really understanding if it really is a yes, and you know, generally speaking, but also, you know, within your industry and lending base and everything else. So but yes, that is also a key component into evaluating how things are going. Access to capital. It just always has been, and not just for the large companies, but for the mom and pops and everywhere in middle market and everywhere in between.
Cool. Well, I appreciate it, Jack. We're gonna land the plane at 11:45. We're gonna take this crew to lunch, you know, and
Well
not be
done.
on spending the money.
All right. Well, thank you all. Just a prediction of the future, what for future, well, a couple things. First of all, I'll do the closer. So yes, this will be published on the BGW YouTube channel, on Shoemaker's YouTube channel, which you can access through my bio or just generally through YouTube. I really want to have a friend of ours on this program who would join us to discuss what is being seen in the workplace, and what the second half of 25 and into 26 would look like as far as office configuration, whether it's hybrid, whether it's, I mean, we keep hearing that uh, uh, companies are being more demanding and making you come into the office, and if you don't like it, go work for someone else. And so it seems like there's been a shift in who has the leverage in that. And so out of my own curiosity, but also others who want to hear about that, we anticipate we will have a program on that in the future.
Cool. Thank you, Jack. I appreciate it. And thank you to everybody that was on the call. See you guys
Thank
next.
you. Have a great day.
All
Bye.
right.